think that often whenever we see stories of adoption, it's a child needs a home, a child goes through the process of adoption with a family that wants them, and a child is placed within the family and the child has a family. What's not really hit on is something that I just learned about last year. Why don't you go look for your biological family? And I just think that that's a really silly thing to say. So when you're telling me that I don't speak like a black person or I speak like I'm white, you're basically saying you don't see diverse black people ever. Do not say I don't see color, because this is inspired from a conversation. I had a conversation with a man who adopted two of my friends from China and told me he didn't see color, which is wild because you went from the United States to China. You intentionally sought out a person of color and then told them not to see their color. I used to feel bad for speaking like I was white and not realizing, hey, this is what you sound like because of your environment. You are just trying to exist in any way that you know how. And those people are trying to limit your existence because of the type of black existence they've seen on TV, because they don't have any other black friends to compare you to. Transracial adoptees tend to date outside their race, and they tend to date white people because they have a white family. White people who claim that they don't see color adopt, which there is a lot of them. Why? Hi, my name is Ruth, and I would like to discourage you from adopting. I'm kidding. I don't want to discourage you from adopting. I would like to encourage you to adopt as an adoptee, but I would like to discourage you from adopting if you are not open to receiving information from those who have adopted and those who are adopted, and everybody else in between. Like I said, I'm adopted, and I find that throughout my time of being adopted, a lot of the opinions and the stories that I get about adoption are from the lens of parents who are adopted. But I'll get more into that as soon as I didn't even introduce myself. So like I said, my name is Ruth. I am a transracial international adoptee, which basically means that I was adopted from Kampala, Uganda, and my parents are Americans, but they lived in Uganda for much longer than I had. My parents are missionaries, and they moved around quite a bit when I was growing up. So although I originally was born and adopted in Uganda, I had moved around from Uganda to Rwanda to Oklahoma
to Chicago, specifically Rogers Park, to Wheaton.
And now I'm currently in college, still in Illinois. As I've moved around a lot, I've found that a lot of people have very different ideas of what adoption is. And I think it's very interesting because adoption is one of those terms that is very commonly known. It's one of the most popular methods of raising a child, other than, having your own biological children. But I find that it's also something that comes with a lot of different misconceptions and a lot of ignorance that's perpetuated by the media and perpetuated by just people who are not very knowledgeable on what it really is. My adoption story, I've only read really and heard from my parents. The newspaper says that I was found on the street, but I think that that's a dramatization. I think my mom told me that. I was taken to an orphanage, and my parents not officially, I was adopted or started the adoption process from the time I was, I think, 2 or 3 months. I was just a couple months old. I don't remember anything related to that. As an adoptee, I share my story constantly. It's not the first thing that I would like to share whenever I meet somebody. I don't open up to people like that instantly. But on the off chance that I meet somebody, and this is actually very often, that I meet somebody and I'm with my family, I will say, like, hey, I'm adopted, if you're wondering who these white people are. This is my family. Often when it comes to meeting strangers and admitting those things comes a lot of ignorance. I find that related to adoption, ignorance is extremely popular. My most common questions when talking about adoption are, so have you ever thought about meeting your real family? Oh, cool. I've always wanted to adopt. It's not even a question, just a statement. Just something, so I can't even think of an example. My mind is drawing a blank. But whenever you bring up adoption, it seems like anything that I have said to somebody, like if I say, hi, I'm a college student, I'm in a relationship, I am studying this, and this. If I mention those things and then I say like, oh, I'm also adopted, people are like, you're adopted? That's wild. And like every aspect of the conversation shifts to that. And then people just talk about what's off the top of their heads about adoption. And that's where I kind of find that a lot of ignorance is spewed. The reason that I wanted to talk about this was because of a lot of different interactions that I've had related to when I bring up adoption by strangers or by people who have just met me. And I kind of want to talk about the things that are not really shared and that I can't really get into within the first 5 minutes of meeting somebody. But I would like for somebody to know that is related to adoption. If you don't know, I also have a podcast. I started the podcast on this specific topic, things that no one talks about when you're adopted. And some of my feelings and some of the things that I've learned have changed about it. So I wanted to put it in a video format because, like I said, there is an emphasis on the parents' perspective on YouTube specifically. But I just want to share it related to my experience and my perspective as an adoptee, and I think it's very, very important that we share the adoptees' feelings as well as the parents. So if you would like to emphasize an adoptee's voice, you can go to my podcast. It's ruthstruthss, anywhere where you listen to podcasts, and that's all I wanted to say. Adoption, like I said, is very unique because it's one of those things that is very, very common in the way that people know what adoption is, and people know that it's a common method when you have kids or when you're raising kids. But I don't think that people even know like the proper definition of what adoption is. And I don't blame them because I didn't even know what the proper definition of adoption was up until I did a project on it a couple of years ago in college. I think that within the media, there are so many stories of adoption that are very simplified as to what it is. Like, take, for example, this is such a silly example, but like Annie or like Shazam or any other thing that you can think of that has an example of adoption. I don't really like watching anything related to adoption unless it's This Is Us, because This Is Us has an accurate portrayal of accurate feelings. But I don't like the adoption trope or the adoption characters, because most of the time if I'm watching something with somebody who is adopted, I'll look up the story and see if I can, find out some background about the person or the character and the inspiration behind it. And for the most part, it's a lot of people writing stories about adoption who are not adopted or who have like little to no ties related to adoption. And I get it, a lot of the media that I'm consuming is TV or movies or books with an adopted character, but it just feels kind of overwhelming to see something as complex and something as personal as adoption portrayed in a certain way that you can't relate to. So when looking at things on YouTube, I love seeing different adoptees talk about the real parts about being adopted, not just how grateful they are to be adopted, because we've heard that time and time again in many different movies and in many different books and in many different videos and in many different inspirational whatevers. But I was scrolling one day and I saw this video by this girl who labeled her video "Why Being Adopted Sucks," and I just found it so refreshing. Not because I think that adoption sucks, but there are so many aspects of adoption that do suck. And I think but I also recognize that it's important that we emphasize the beauty of adoption so that we can encourage people who are capable and educated enough to adopt. I think it's important that parents feel as though they can adopt and feel equipped to adopt, but also to know that there is value in sharing adoptee stories that are accurate and real. So seeing Kira's story was really encouraging to me as an adoptee, because being adopted is kind of an isolated thing that I really don't know how to describe that well, but I'm going to try. I'm adopted. I have a brother who's adopted. I have three siblings who are biologically related to my parents. And my brother, like I said, is adopted. But we have different adoption stories, and we have different personalities, and we have different traits, and adoption has manifested itself in our lives very, very differently. The way that I feel about my adoption is kind of like physically, on the surface, on a very shallow level, I am a Ugandan woman, and in America, I'm just seen as a black woman. I don't think that ethnicity is really that stressed in America, but it's really hard for me to relate to other Ugandans due to the fact that I don't have a Ugandan family, but in the way that I did not learn tradition, I didn't learn how to do my natural hair properly. I can't speak the language, but there are so many different reasons as to why I didn't want to when I was younger. And then in America, as a black woman, it's hard for me to identify with other black women due to the fact I don't have a black family. It's a little bit isolating because as an adoptee, I'm looking to other adoptees who maybe mirror my situation so that I can feel like I have somebody to relate to. I have a lot of people to relate to that are not adopted and that have surface level things in common with me, but it is just much harder to find. It's such an isolating feeling to know that you are the only person going through what you are going through related to your adoption. If I meet another adoptee, they may not be an international adoptee, so they might not relate to me on that. Or they may be an in-family adoptee where one of their family members couldn't take care of them, so they were moved from one family member to another and then have a whole subset of their family, but they still know their family. There are so many complexities related to adoption that get really simplified, and then when people speak about adoption to me, it feels like I am in I'm speaking at a college level to people who have an elementary understanding of certain things. So that's why I feel like it's very isolating. Adoption is the social, emotional, and legal process in which children who will not be raised by their parents become full and permanent legal members of another family while maintaining genetic and psychological connections to their birth family. And I think that it is so important that we recognize the last part of that, while maintaining genetic and psychological connections to their birth family. I think that often whenever we see stories of adoption, it's a child needs a home, a child goes through the process of adoption with a family that wants them, and a child is placed within the family and the child has a family. What's not really hit on is something that I just learned about last year, the 7 core issues that are common among other adoptees. So I wanted to emphasize the part of while maintaining genetic and psychological connections to their birth family, because I'm going to say it again, manifests itself into every adoption differently. But the 7 core issues in adoption that I just learned about, that I'm so happy that I did learn about, because I find that I've been so ignorant about adoption up until recently, when I've done the research into seeing what adoption really is and why I may be feeling the way that I'm feeling. So the 7 core issues are loss. So anytime that a family, anytime you go from one family to another as a person, or if you're with a sibling, or if you're with anybody, you go from losing a family to gaining one. And I find that when people talk about adoptions, simply just the gain and not recognizing that you're losing your family for whatever reason, and that's a lot to deal with. And then you then go into thinking of rejection, which is the second one. So if you're thinking about why you lost your original family, it manifests itself, it manifests itself into you thinking about, why did my original family not want me? I think about that all the time. I can think of a million different scenarios, and I'm never going to get the correct answer because I am just simply never going to know. And the common person may say, well, why don't you just find out why your parents gave you up? Why don't you go look for your biological family? And I just think that that's a really silly thing to say, because most of the time it comes from people who, like, either are just meeting me, like, who do not know me enough to ask that question, or it's from somebody who's surprisingly known me a long time and, like, just brings it up in, like, a really weird way that's not very, what's the word? Like, sensitive? I don't know. Either way, it's weird because it's really personal. Why would I, as somebody who's been abandoned by my family, why would the abandoned go and seek out the abandoner if I'm dealing with the effects of being abandoned? That's, to me, what rejection for adoption is. So shame. So there's a lot of shame in rejection. I feel like I never wanted to admit that I was adopted when I was a kid because, you know, kids make jokes about adoption. Like, kids think it's funny. I don't think it's funny. But to joke about, like, how, I don't know, like, their brother is actually adopted, or they look adopted because they don't look like their biological family. I don't know. It's shameful in many different ways that I don't quite know how to articulate, but nobody is, like, jumping to be adopted. It's not desirable to be left. It's desirable to gain a family, but it's not desirable to lose one. But that's what adoption is, and it feels a little bit shameful. So next is grief. I face a lot of grief in the way that I could have had a whole entire life that I know absolutely nothing about. And that keeps me up at night sometimes, because I just have no idea of what I was supposed to be. Which is fine, because it's fine because I don't know anything related to my past, but it's also sad because I have no idea where my physical traits come from, or where, like, my thought patterns come from, or, like, anything related to my biology. So I'm grieving and then I'm identifying. That's number 2, is identity. Identity issues like crazy. Like, I think this is a very common theme within movies where a child, like, acts out because they don't have, you know, their biological family, or they find their identity in being the rebellious kid. So I have a lot of identity issues. Number 6 is intimacy. So my mom talked to me about this a couple days ago, even, that when I was a kid, I used to put a wall up and not want to be, you know, like, open or intimate. And I don't really know what drives that fully, because I also did move around a lot, which affects my intimacy as well. But there is something about a child not having her biological mother that triggers something in a baby, and then transforms when you're an adult. I read about this. I can't remember where. It's so annoying when you're a college student and you read so much interesting things that are credible, but you can't recite them, because who recites a whole entire article, but you want to tell people about things? So from the time you're a child, if you're adopted as a baby, you're automatically in fight or flight mode. Even though you have a mother, even though I had a mother, it's just a different type of bond, because it's not like my biological bond that I was meant to have. And I know people say love is enough, but I think that when you say things like that, you're kind of just distracting from the reality of certain things, like intimacy issues, and ignoring the 7 core issues in adoption. and you should be open about exploring that. Anyways, the last one is control. And I don't really know how to speak on that one properly because all of the issues that I have with control have to do with me not being in control of my environment growing up, where I moved around a lot, and not so much as me being adopted. But I can see where if you were adopted maybe a little bit later in life, you don't feel as though you had control because your family didn't have control over you, or people were trying to have control over you and they just couldn't manage, so they gave you to another family as an older person. Or maybe if you were young, you could feel it and you can articulate it better than I can. So those are the 7 core issues in adoption. So the different types of adoption I don't want to spend too much time on, but I only recently figured out what they were. I knew of them, but I didn't know the intricacies of them to explain them well enough as I do now. So the different types of adoption are international versus domestic. I'm international adoptee, and most of my friends. Is that correct? No. I'm international adoptee, but recently I've been meeting a lot of domestic adoptees that have different perspectives than I do, which is why I think it's so important to recognize that when you say things like, well, if I were adopted, I would go find my biological family. It's like there are 6 different types of adoption that you could be a part of, and there's so many different nuances related to adoption, so why would you even make that broad of a statement if I were adopted? Calm down. It's too much. So I'm an international adoptee, like I said. I'm gonna have a different set of issues than my friend who is a domestic adoptee. We have things in common, but we have different experiences and perspectives. So I think it's important to recognize the nuances of being a different type of adoptee than your other adopted friend, and then also talking to people and saying and asking them their specific adoptee stories, and not just making generalizations about adoption. Open versus closed adoptee cases, which I'm pretty sure is kind of a common thing because I think that a lot of movies like to hit on open versus closed. Open is just, of course, where you, the birth parents, would have all the information and all, like, I don't want to say control, but if, like, I'll give an example. Like, I'm pulling from a TV show. But if a mother is not able to take care of her child, she'll give the child up for adoption. But if she wants to see the child, she can see the child and work out an agreement with the parents. That's open. And then closed is more of, I don't know if mine is closed because when I was adopted, I was just left at the orphanage to be placed in a home. And we really don't know where I came from at all. So, like, even if there was somebody trying to claim me, they didn't show up. So I'm pretty sure it's closed because my birth parents are the only ones who have, like, information and details related to me, and the only ones that have, like, claimed me. Whereas, like, nobody placed me voluntarily and said, I want to see this child. So I don't think it's, yeah. And then there's public versus private, and I have to read this out because I am not going to get it correct if I don't. Sorry. It's like they will tell you in communications classes, memorize certain things, but I can't. Okay. So, independent versus private. Sorry. Independent/private versus public. So, independent, voluntary placement, or private adoption is when a birth parent voluntarily places their child up for adoption directly with the family of their choice, whereas with a public adoption, the Department of Social Services take custody of their child, and the birth parents have no choice where the child is placed in the foster system. I'm pretty sure that mine would have been private, but I don't know because somebody did make I don't even know if I can share that because I don't know those details. Yeah, those are the different types of adoption. The last thing that I want to hit on, I don't want to spend too much time talking about it, but it's the whitewashing and the transracial aspect of being an adoptee. I find that when white people who claim that they don't see color adopt, which there is a lot of them, why? When white people who adopt, who claim they don't see color, adopt, and they treat their child like any other child, and don't like give them any other special treatment or whatever, which is what they always say, I find that I have noticed that a lot of adoptees date outside of their race intentionally and have bias against their own race. And I don't think that's a coincidence at all. If you're raised to not see color, I'm pretty sure, because I felt this when I was younger, for sure. Like, this is so embarrassing to admit, but you are going to feel some sort of negative affiliation with your own race. I had a negative affiliation. Like, I didn't see the beauty in myself, so I didn't think that other black people who were as dark as me were really as desirable until middle school, when I when that completely just turned around. And it's so disgusting that I felt those things against people, and I'm happy that my parents never ever would say like, we don't see your color. Like, they were very honest with me. But I want to talk about when you're in a family situation with people who are outside of your race, it makes it harder to accept yourself a little bit if they are not supportive of you, and if they do not like constantly affirm you and people who look like you and surround you with people who look like you. There's something in your mind, I don't know how to explain this. There is something in your mind that has a little bit of self-hatred, or a little bit of like, oh, let me take pride in being the token because I am the token. Like, I am born the token. And I was fine with being the token up until like high school. And I was like, this is kind of stupid. Like, I'm around people who are fine with me making jokes about being the token and who view me as the token. And I'm taking pride in being the token. And I am now disgusted by people who are very clearly like token kids and who like don't see color, but like intentionally do things that like prove that they do. You know, like I said, transracial adoptees tend to date outside their race, and they tend to date other white people. Why did I say that? Tend to date white people because they have a white family. When I was younger, I thought I was going to marry a white boy because that's what I wanted, because I had self-hatred inside of me. No matter what they preached to me, like, it didn't matter. That was just what was in my head. And then I got to college and I was like, you know, it'd be really, really nice if I had a fully black family. Like, that would be cool. Like, I could just recreate the family that I never had. And then I chased that, and then I fell in love with a white boy, and now I'm getting married, and like, it's fine. Anyways, there's just a lot to work through related to the way that you see race when you don't see it in your family, really. And even though I was raised in Africa, there's like a certain level of tokenism, a certain level of like hierarchy that I felt, at least, maybe if you may not feel it, that I felt, and the way that I observed race. And I think it's so important, if you are somebody that has adopted and you have adopted internationally, do not say, I don't see color, because this is inspired from a conversation. I had a conversation with a man who adopted two of my friends from China, and told me he didn't see color, which is wild because you went from the United States to China. You intentionally sought out a person of color and then told them not to see their color. I just think it's really funny. But it's actually very tragic, because then the kids are going to have like a warped view of how the world works. Anyways, yeah, the whitewashing of being a child. Oh, and then I want to talk about the whitewashing of other people placed on you. So there's the whitewashing that happens within your brain a little bit. And then there's also the whitewashing of people telling you that you sound a certain way. And then not taking into account that you're not raised with other black people. You were raised by white people. Growing up all the time, was told that I talk like I'm white. Which, you know what? I'm not even going to fault anybody, because I was raised by white people, literal white people, Caucasians. My mom is from Texas and my dad is from Minnesota. So I pick up their speech. It's classic, very basic knowledge of sociolinguistics. You are the product of your environment, and you are the speech that your parents have, like you are. So it only made sense that I turned out talking this way, and I really don't take offense to children calling out certain observations. I take offense to adults and teenagers who know better, because why would you tell me that I don't speak like a black person if you don't even have more than 3 black friends that you would claim that would claim you back? Like, you don't even know what diversity within black people looks like. So when you're telling me that I don't speak like a black person or I speak like I'm white, you're basically saying you don't see diverse black people ever. I used to feel bad for speaking like I was white and not realizing, hey, this is what you sound like because of your environment. You are just trying to exist in any way that you know how. And those people are trying to limit your existence because of the type of black existence they've seen on TV, because they don't have any other black friends to compare you to. And then also, we live in America where you have to sound professional to some extent, or like it's a common idea that the more white you sound, the more successful you are. Like, it's very much stressed that you have to have a certain style of speaking in order to be successful. So it only makes sense. And then also, before I go off on that tangent, and also, if you're a black person in predominantly white institutions, even though you may have black parents, you are constantly around other white institutions that are majority white. So you pick up, like I said, sociolinguistics, you pick up their style of speaking, and it only makes sense because, like I said, we're told that in order to be successful, you have to have a certain level of professionalism to you, which is sounding more white. So if we're told that and we're around majority white institutions, I don't really know what people expect, like, for people to sound like. And I'm not saying that you would sound less professional if you sounded more black. I'm just saying it only makes sense that people are a product of their environment. So it shouldn't be a shock to people that people sound white. But it also shouldn't be you sound white, because black people are the most diverse group probably of all the people, because there are black people in nearly every country and continent. So why is the view of blackness so linear for you to say you don't sound like you're black for real? Because there's so many diverse black people in the world, and for me to not sound like that one character on a TV show that you saw that one time, it doesn't mean that I'm less valid as a black person. Like, so yeah, that's the whitewashing of adoptees. Yeah, those are all of the topics that I have related to what no one talks about when you're adopted, that I wanted to go in depth about. So I'm very happy that you decided to listen to this. If, of course, you listened to this the whole way through. Even if you didn't, you're still hearing this. If you want, you can listen to my podcast. It is everywhere where podcasts are. It is ruthstruthss at, I was going to say at something. It's not at anything. It's just on anywhere you want to listen to podcasts. So I hope you enjoyed this YouTube video. Give it a like, give it a share. I might upload something else. I might not.